Hey everyone, and welcome to the Uncorked Corner podcast, where we cover the full spread of food and beverage industry topics. My name is Bianca, PR and marketing professional by day and food and wine connoisseur by night.
And my name is Nick, an accountant with a passion for barbecue, beer, and whiskey. Our guest today is Gabriel Demarco, Oenologist and Viticulturist of Cave Spring Vineyards, located in Ontario, Canada. They are our very first Canada-based guest and one of the premier wineries in the Niagara Escarpment, overlooking Lake Ontario.
During this episode, we discuss the unique region Cave Spring Vineyard calls home, the importance of sustainability in the winemaking process, and everything you need to know about their production, bottling, and vineyard experiences.
On that note, let's get into the podcast. So why don't you start by just giving us an idea of your background, how you got started as an enologist, how you got started with Cave Springs, and take us through that. Maybe give us a little intro on Cave Springs, how long the vineyards have been around, and then we can go into talking about the nuts and bolts behind the winemaking.
Yeah, you got the Niagara Peninsula between the Niagara River, Grimsby, which is a small kind of rural city, and the Lake Ontario and the Escarpment is the largest viticultural zone east of the Rockies on the continent of North America. I don't know if it's like 16, we have 16 or just over 16,000 acres of Vitis vinifera here. And so we can do that because it's a globally unique mesoclimate. And so that kind of stuff's pretty cool. I don't know if your listeners would be down with that, but we think of Canada as a cold place, with short summers that aren't very nice and really cold winters. But we are actually at the 43rd degree latitude, which is right in line with Bordeaux and Florence, so Chianti, right? And so how do we then grow Vitis vinifera here? And how come we can and they can, and what makes it special? Does that kind of stuff interest you? Like, if we go on that tour?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a really cool place, a very special place. Like, government's protected it. Like, you can't build on it. Like, it's all protected. And I'd love to, if you guys are willing to listen, I'd definitely talk about that a little bit.
Take us through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so my name's Gabriel Demarco. I got into winemaking kind of through a jagged path. I was family. My background's Italian. My mother's an Italian immigrant. My father is his parents are Italian immigrants. So I was part of the family table, but we weren't super enthusiastic wine drinkers. Like, my dad wasn't a connoisseur or anything, or my mom. But it was always present. I got into theater, actually. I got into acting. Initially, I did a degree in theater and world history, and then I did another degree in performance and started acting. And I got lucky enough to be hired at this really fancy restaurant downtown Toronto. And they had this amazing wine education program. And that's kind of where I found kind of my footing in the wine business. And so I started studying wine. I had registered to do my diploma in wine business, essentially. And part of my prerequisite reading for that was wine science for the non-scientist. And for me, that was by page 60, I was hooked. Like, I was like, where do I study wine science, And then so basically that's kind of how I got into winemaking, and then the studying, and then working with Cave Spring. The restaurant company I worked with in Toronto is still our largest customer. Like, we do a lot of unique blends for them. We work with them very closely. And so I was very familiar with Cave Spring. Cave Spring, we grow grapes on what are arguably the best vineyard sites in the province, if not among the best in our country. So I knew exactly where I wanted to be. So when I came to Niagara, I emailed my mentor, Angelo, and founding partner, 6 times before he gave me an interview. And I talked him into hiring me as a vineyard hand. And I hoed fields and dug holes for a season with a smile on my face. And I slowly worked my way up from there. It's been a decade. And it's been a great decade of collaboration and growth in the company. So that's kind of how I ended up into winemaking. And with Cave Spring, it's so it's been great.
What is the history behind the Cave Spring name and the winery itself?
Yeah, so it actually is named after the place of origin. So Cave Spring speaks of an actual section of land at the base of the physical escarpment. And it was named by colonial settlers. The land itself was not inhabited prior to colonials arriving. And so it was named by the colonial settlers for the fact that there were springs coming out of the escarpment cliffs. And so they were mineral-rich springs coming from the limestone, and there were caves, and being that there were caves, they were cooler, and so you could store food and preserves in there. You get water from before there was running water, of course, right? So you get your water from the springs, and you store your food in the caves. And so when Len was starting the business or looking to buy vineyard land in the early 70s with his family, he knew that he wanted to grow grapes in a place, right? He didn't want to name it after himself. He wanted to grow grapes in a place. And so he did a lot of research and planning and found Cave Spring and knew right away that was the place. So he purchased his first vineyard holdings in 1973, planted in 76. And they were selling grapes just to anyone interested in buying them, for like table fruit, for home winemaking. And in 86, I apologize, his long friend, Angelo Pavan, and him decided to do a winery. So in 1986 was their first vintage. And then of course, Len and Angelo were pioneers as well in establishing the Vintners Quality Alliance, or VQA, which is our governing regulation body. And that is very similar to what you would get in, say, France or Italy with AOC and DOC. So it's provincially legislated. It's not federal, it is provincial. Every province has its own legislation, but it is like you have to submit your wines, and it guarantees origin of place and then a certain integrity of growing and making. And that's stamped on all the bottles. And so Len was a pioneer in writing that, and that went through provincial law in the late 90s, 99. And then Angelo, in conjunction with geologists and geographers, developed our sub-appellation system, which is something that is quite unique for a region as young as ours to have an actual sub-appellation system. So we have 10 sub-appellations based on geography, proximity to the lake, elevation. And so that kind of was like built into law in 2005 with the kind of origins of the original growing areas. There's an appellation on Lake Erie as well on the North Shore, and then the 10 sub-appellations in Niagara between the lake and the bench. And then in 2007, they added Prince Edward County, which is on the north side of Lake Ontario. It's the smallest of the appellations.
So you were telling us a little bit about before you're our first non-US based
awesome
vineyard and winery.
Well, we're honored. We're really honored. Yes, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So tell us a bit. You were comparing yourself latitude-wise to Bordeaux, France, and Florence, Italy. Talk to us about how your location really affects your wine and the flavors that you get compared to somewhere that we're more familiar with, like a Napa Valley or New England.
Yeah. It's a very cool place. I'm kind of locked into the romance and the scape of it. The science of it fascinates me. So Canada scientifically has like two scientifically 100% viable viticultural zones. Obviously, there's other places that make exceptional wine that we're partners with, but in terms of 100% viability, there's the Niagara Peninsula between the lake and the escarpment, and Okanagan Valley out in BC. And so what makes the peninsula viable? Because our latitude is the same as two very famous regions in Europe, right? So, why can't we do that in more places outside of the escarpment and the lake? Well, if you look at those zones, they're moderated heavily by bodies of water also. And so really it's through fortune that over many, many years, there's been an erosion process. Glaciation has created an escarpment formation that is actually quite long. It starts, it comes above ground just west of the Finger Lakes in New York State. It creeps towards the lake and kisses the lake at a perfect distance between the lake and the escarpment to create climactic moderation. Then it shoots north all the way up to Manitoulin Island and left all the way into Wisconsin, and then shoots south all the way down and near Chicago before it goes back underground. So it's a massive land formation. And that formation kissing the lake traps lake winds. So a lot of people think that we're growing Vitis vinifera, European wine grapes, like Cabernet Franc, Chardonnay, Riesling, Pinot Noir, with lake effect. But we're actually growing Vitis vinifera because we have lake escarpment effect. So if you're growing grapes with lake effect, you can grow your grapes in maybe 1 mile off the lake before you lose the lake effect, like the moderating effect from the lake. But because the escarpment is trapping in the lake winds, we can grow grapes up to 6 miles off the lake. So depending on the sub-appellation, we're growing wine grapes, 6. So not only are you getting lake effect, now you're picking up continental heat units. And so you get the double effect. So we have lake effect, which moderates temperature up in the winter. It elongates the growing season in spring and fall. But then we're picking up a large amount of continental heat units. And because of that, our heat unit accumulation annually is on average, Sonoma County, in hot years, it surpasses Napa. So it's like it's this little bubble, little protected zone that allows us to do, not just wine grapes, but with peaches, plums, cherries, nectarines, all within this little protected zone. So it's a very cool place, and very special for that just fortune of time and chance, that the escarpment kisses the lake at that perfect distance, at the perfect location. Because if you look at the Great Lakes through the winter, if I may go on a little further, is they tend to freeze in the winter. And if you get frozen water, you lose your winter protection. But Lake Ontario is over 800 feet deep at its deepest. And so it doesn't freeze in the winter. And so we get cold fronts that come across the lake, pick up the heat from the water, sweep inland, warm up the grapes and the terroir here, and then hit the escarpment and cycle back. And so we're getting this constant air movement that elevates temperature just enough so if there's a line for sustainability, we're on the good side of that line. And it's thanks to that relationship between the deep lake and the escarpment wall. Yeah.
Another unique point about your wines is that they are vegan and certified sustainable. Is that correct? Yeah. Can you explain to us what makes that process different than a wine that wouldn't be?
Yeah, so for us, we did a pretty substantial audit on our vineyard practices and winemaking. We've always been a vegan wines. I mean, I think in the past that we've made wines for over 30 years or 29 years. There's been like 2 non-vegan wines in the entire history of the company. It's like we just make vegan wine. But sustainability was something that we thought was crucially important for the future generations. And so really what that means is because I think there's a general tone in conversation about or like viticulture in general. If it's not organic, it's bad. And the truth is that technology isn't all bad. It's the misuse of technology that's bad. And it requires extra time and analysis of products being used, when you use them, how you use them. And so we've taken the time to audit the entire process from fuel use, water use, soil compaction, product, like how they're made, what they're made of, how they break down, whether it be organic or conventional, and put together a system that's taken a lot of man hours that is, we feel better for the environment than, say, dogmatically committing to a vineyard approach that has like a catch tag on it. And so, that takes a lot of time. And we're kind of in the home stretch with that approach. The first 5 years of transitioning was a lot of extra legwork and like diagnosing blocks and that kind of stuff. But now that we're in the home stretch, like everyone is on board, from like our general laborer to our like vineyard managers, myself, owners. Sometimes it costs us more money. That doesn't matter. It's the goal. Like Angelo Pavan always says, one of our founding partners is, the vineyards have to be better for the next generation, not the same or worse. So that's kind of our goal. So the difference between, I guess to answer your question, completely is the difference between sustainable viticulture and not sustainable viticulture is the conscious like use of things, like, you know, like environment before, you know, was it people, planet, profit, you know, so people, you know, have to be safe and working in an environment that is sustainable. The planet has to be sustainable, otherwise we don't have grapes. And then, you know, of course, if the business isn't viable, then we don't have we don't have wine. So you have to factor that in, of course, but that is not the first variable of concern. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, totally. That was awesome. So can you walk us through now that sustainable process, making wine for someone that isn't really familiar, ground to bottle? Can you just walk us through the steps that you take, how long, you know, you're aging things for, what makes you decide how long you're going to age something to get a certain vintage on it? Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, so every wine, of course, is different. We are really fortunate, or I guess myself as well, like as a winemaker, it's kind of the dream. We farm 160 acres of like premium Beamsville Bench Vitis vinifera, European wine grapes. So it's like 160 acres of, like, in my opinion, you know, among the best anyway of the sub-appellations in Ontario. It's called the Beamsville Bench. And so even if our wine is, you know, declassified to a larger appellation group, it's still majority of the fruit comes from those vineyard sites. And so we're farming, like over 90% of our fruit is from our estate. And so we will basically, we audit individual blocks and sections of blocks based on vigor and vine health and all these things to decide where the wine goes. So from pruning, where you go in the winter time, and that pruning in Ontario is not pleasant. It is cold. Like I joke that we're in the tropics of Canada. That no way resembles the tropics. I mean, it means we get, you know, a couple of feet less snow, but it's very cold. So we're pruning in the winter, and we're pruning each block specifically for the needs of that block in terms of vine health first, and so we do that first. And then we go in and we manage canopy, you know, so there's leaf removal and all the fun stuff you can talk about, like the geeky wine stuff, how to tweak wine style based on canopy management. We'd manage block to block based on where the wine is destined. And then at harvest, you know, depending machine or hand, we do both. And then processing, we like to use a little bit of skin contact in even our white wines, just to, you know, flesh out some texture. Because even white wines have tannin. We think of red wine as the tannic, you know, the tannic red. But white wines carry tannins. They're referred to in the wine world as phenols, like phenolics. So those are white tannins, essentially, if they could generalize. And so we look to marry the white tannin tension into the whites as well to give mouthfeel and texture and ageability. And then fermentations, we are over 90% wild, natural ferments. For our table wine. So what does that mean? I guess it means we don't purchase packaged yeast and inoculate. We really try to be hands-off using the yeast from the skins and that are in the air to ferment the wines, which gives us an element of and even an added element of terroir and an origin of place. And then extended lees contact. So to define that term as well is when the fermentation is finished, the yeast precipitate out of the finished wine and sit at the bottom of the tank or barrel, and those are called lees. And it's just like gelatinous, gummy, so like leftover lees, and those give flavor and texture to the wines. And we leave the wine on those for an extended period of time without sulfur. So those lees provide protection from oxidation. And of course, if the tanks are full, then you're very careful. You don't really have to worry too much about microbial spoilage. So minimizing our sulfur use, maximizing our texture, maximizing our natural processes. And then of course, we have a very nice barrel collection, like a really nice one. And a lot of wine, red and white, goes into those old barrels and larger format casks. And those, again, fleshing out texture, fleshing out harmony in the wine. So really a hands-off approach to winemaking. Focusing on expressing terroir from our very special vineyard sites.
Yes, you're really letting the grapes do the work there.
Exactly.
Now, can you break down a little bit what exactly are the tannins? How does that affect the overall flavor profile of the wine?
Yeah, in red and white, or just do you want to focus just in general?
In general.
Yeah, so I mean, we always think of I think generally whenever I'm out tasting wine and we're talking about wine, like everyone always refers to like sweetness and alcohol when it comes to ripening fruit. But really, I mean, arguably, what is more important, you know, I say arguably because I mean it's perspective, right? So one person's perspective is different than another's. But arguably, what is more important than even sugar ripeness is phenolic ripeness or tannin ripeness. And if you have unripe tannins in red wine, you get bitterness and green stemminess. You know, I think we're more familiar seeing that from, you know, cheaper red wines from anywhere in the world, right? And in white wines, especially for what we try to do with the majority of our whites, when we're trying to get some of that white phenolic tension in the wine, underripe skins in the white, again, will lead to bitterness and just awkward flavors in the wine. And so as important as getting the sugars you want for quality wine, it's equally important to get phenolic ripeness. And that really, in our climate, as we are 100% viable, we still need to, we don't have a very long growing season. We have a shorter growing season. And that's really why we're defined as a cool climate, is because our season is quite truncated. And so it's very important for us to manage our yields on the low side to make sure we get both the sugars and the phenolic ripeness or the tannin ripeness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you explain where those tannins are coming from?
Yeah, for sure. Primarily, well, they come from pretty much all parts of the grape that come into the winery. So the stems, the seeds, the skins, there's even a form of tannin in the juice, but not aggressive. And so, yeah, they come from that, so that you can dictate the way in which you get your tannins by the way you treat your fruit before it comes in. So if you whole cluster harvest, so by hand you go through and you cut all the stem and grapes together, so you haven't disturbed any of that. And so you really, at that point, you have no tannin extraction. Now, if you bring that full cluster on stem, throw it in the press, and press the crap out of it, you know, you're going to extract that bitter tannin from the stems and the seeds and stuff like that. Now, the same goes for white, whether you machine or hand it, depending on the resting time on the skins and seeds will depend on how much tannin get into the wine. But one thing that's very important to mention is tannin extraction changes with heat, time, and alcohol. And so fermentation temperature, alcohol content will dictate a lot of the way you extract your tannins. And so if you end up, you know, post-fermentation, say a lot of winemakers will like to do post-fermentation soaking. That is a calculated decision because you have to manage your tannins, especially at that point, because you're going to start pulling out seed tannin and different bitter tannins. But that being said, people do it successfully all the time. We do it as well. It's just you have to be aware of the variables of concern with the tannin extraction at that point. Yeah. Is that clear?
Yeah, totally. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
You have a lot of different varietals of wine. How many bottles do you produce a year?
Maybe the bottles, I know cases off the top of my head. Let me do the math on bottles. So we're 600,000 bottles, 50,000 cases. But now in Ontario, just like every major region in the world, I think we're, in terms of what we produce, we're pretty small in terms of tonnage processed. So it doesn't, like, you know, I said we were the largest viticultural zone east of the Rockies in North America, but there's not a lot of very big viticultural zones east of the Rockies in North America. So 16,000 acres of vinifera isn't a lot by world standards. But what we've learned, just like every other region, every other viable viticultural zone, is that there are a subset of varieties that really work best in any given zone, and that we are not unique to that. We found in the 35 years of growing grapes that there really are 6 varieties, 4 with a really firm marketing hold. So they're kind of referred to in the peninsula as the core 4. And then there's 2 that have kind of been added onto that are very good. So, you know, Chardonnay and Riesling, of course, those are the originals and the most famous. Cab Franc, Pinot Noir, and then a Pinot Grigio, whatever you prefer in whatever language, and then Gamay Noir. And the number one variable in Niagara, people always think that it's heat units and ripening. It's actually that's not the number one variable. It is in fact the winter still. So we the number one variable to success is surviving the winter. Even though it is moderated, it does sometimes get quite cold. So you need to make sure you have winter hardy varieties, and all 6 of those varieties survive the coldest winters, with obviously the moderating effects of the lake and the escarpment. And then they also ripen sugar ripeness and tannin ripeness in our shorter season every season. And so now that we've identified those, of course, there's still, like, like in any subappellate or any vinifera zone, any viticultural zone, there's pockets where like people are growing Merlot and Syrah and Sauv Blanc, but en masse, like the best varieties for the peninsula are those 6. And they ripen every year, they survive every winter. And so for that, you're not fighting, trunk damage and all these things that come with winter injury. You're getting, ripe fruit, the wine gets better. So those are the best varieties.
Yep. And I saw that it's about 55% of your wines are actually the Riesling. So that's kind of your number one. That's your specialty. I'm sure you have a love for all the wines that you produce there, but is there one that stands out that's really your favorite bottle, your favorite vintage that you've made?
Well, funny, yeah. So I mean, outside of winemaking, I've always been a Cab Franc geek. Like even before, I just have something intriguing about Cab Franc. This varietal that is not given a ton of attention, that is like at its best still has this like herbaceous note to it, that's savory, like it's smoky, like it's all the things you love about Bordeaux red, but fresh, and like it has like a really nice like tone to the wine. So that's kind of like, as a geek outside of, I've always loved Cab Franc, but making Riesling, growing Riesling here is pretty a big treat, So I guess we're actually going to try one of my favorite wines of all time that I've personally made here is the 2016 CSV Riesling. We've had some fun like pushing the envelope. So the goal with us is, push the envelope of winemaking, always being, pushing the envelope, but always bringing it back to like a very like structured place, clean, precise. And this wine, when we were putting it together, the final blend, we had bottled it, and Angelo, we were tasting it right as it was being released. And he's like, "Gabe, we went too far this time, Gabe. We went too far, like we pushed it too far this time." And then 6 months later, we got 94 points on that wine in Wine Enthusiast. So we were like, it came together, and it was this really special wine from a very nice vintage. It's just got this, but I'll always remember that moment when Andrew's like, we went too far, Gabe. We went too far. So that wine holds a fondness. That memory is fond for me. But the Riesling Estate, which we'll try too, is I think probably the most authentic of, like, in terms of a wine we do at a reasonable volume, and it is like it comes from the same vineyard sites as the CSV, just a declassified section of those blocks. And that wine for me probably is like the most accessible wine that is like kind of the most authentic to Cave Spring. But yeah, that 16 CSV is something that I hold really fond memories of.
Nice. Yeah, so we got from you the 17 Cabernet Franc, the 17 Pinot Noir, the 2016 Riesling CSV that you were talking about there, and then the 2017, the Estate Riesling. So we're excited to get into those. Do you want to walk us through kind of your experience with each of those a bit? Bianca has the wines down there with her. I'm in a different state completely, so I didn't get to have access to them. But maybe you can just walk us through what you'll typically expect for flavor profiles out of those 4.
Yeah. So we have 3 17s and a 16. The 17 was an interesting vintage in Ontario. It was actually quite like, the spring was cold, the summer was average with like a bit more precipitation than you'd like, but the fall was spectacular. And so 17s were a bit of a challenge, not that we didn't get the heat units to ripen, but that they came late. And because of that, there was like, a slightly higher disease pressure than usual. And so we still did like our natural fermentation process, very hands-off winemaking process, but the season was long. We were harvesting into late November, which is late for us, and it was cold, and the grapes were, they were ready to come off. And but the wines really show. I really love how they show. Like they have this like white flower. The 17 Rieslings, this white flower, like honeysuckle note to them, almost like they hung through a frost. And so you can like get the hue of that frost, like it speaks to you in the wine. But then you have the freshness and the skin ripeness that we got from the late season as well. So it's like that kind of like pull between tension and ripe vivacious palate, if I can use that word. And the 16 was dry and hot, one of the hottest, driest years we've had. And that wine is just extract, very true, fresh Riesling, dry, but like extract, just tons of mouthfeel and tons of weight. And then the Pinot Noir is very much kind of inspired. Like we get ripe Pinot Noir here, but we get so if I can use the word, like traditional manner, so more in the Burgundian style than in, say, the California style. They're more of those like peppery notes, earthy tones, alcohol between 13%, 12.5%, 13%, rather than like 13 to 14, 15. And so they're fresh, like very Burgundian in style, but very true to Ontario, obviously, from our escarpment sites. And then Cab Franc, which we can effortlessly do here, is a joy to grow and make. Apart from my geekdom of that variety from my previous life, it just does exceptionally well here, and gets very ripe. And it's even that, like the wine that's in the States, our Cab Franc is kind of our entry into our Cab Franc family. But that speaks like it's not like a less ripe wine. It comes from our younger fruit, and it still spends 16 months in barrel, and just a little bit of new. It's ripe, beautiful expression of Cab Franc, like not trying to be anything else but just like true Cab Franc. So for those Cab Franc lovers out there, I recommend exploring that wine for sure. Yeah.
You don't see too many Cab Francs. How would you explain to our listeners what that would taste like? What were the primary tasting notes in that wine?
Yeah, Cab Franc is one of the three major varieties in Bordeaux. And, we hear a lot of Cab Sauv, we hear a lot about Merlot, and then Cab Franc is always there, right? It's just always the player that isn't talked about. It is reminiscent of those two varieties. Like you'll taste it. If you didn't know it was Cab Franc, you'd be like, oh, is this a Bordeaux red, but it has, I call it like the kind of the princess of the three, like the feminine of the three. Like it is everything that, say, Cab Sauv is or Merlot is, but it has like a bit more acidity, a bit more finesse. And so it is like in the blend, it is you get your black pepper, you get your mint, you get your savory, smoky notes. On the palate, it's juicy, it's extracted, it has a nice tannin structure. But then there's like this fresh acidity that is like present down the seam of the wine that then like lifts the palate. And so you end up with a wine that is kind of in the family of the Merlots and the Cab Sauvs, but a bit more approachable and finessed, not as like, bold, although very age worthy. I love the way it ages. It gets this like pencil lead as it ages. It like that we always say here. You get like this pencil lead note. Yeah.
How do you decide how to bottle them? So of course, I think we don't think about that often, but all wines typically have their own kind of unique styling and bottle type. Do you choose that because of the flavor, or like the storing of the wines, or is that more of just a stylistic preference?
Well, first off is for us is to make sure to give the wine time, like both in the winery and then post bottling. And so for all the red wines, spend minimum of 10 months in barrel, and that process is beneficial to the wines because you get a process called micro oxidation, where you'll get very small amounts of oxygen into the wine over time, and that helps to bring the tannins together, harmonize all those elements of the wine together. And so all the wines kind of start there with that kind of minimum requirement of time. And for the white wines, time on lees will help with that harmony. And then in the bottling process, it's just really about time. Like, of course, sometimes we have the fortune of a wine being so popular that we have to, be like, we need to get this to bottle. But in a perfect world where we just basically the wine dictates when we bottle it. So we'll try it. We'll see where it is from a harmony perspective, and then we'll say, okay, it's time to move this towards bottling. It's ready, So.
Can you walk us a little bit through on your vineyard, on your winery? Do you have anything that visitors can look forward to experiencing if they get to visit in person?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so our winery is located 7 kilometers or 3 miles from the vineyards. We're actually this week we're opening up a tasting room right in the heart of the vineyards, which is pretty exciting. But if you were to come to the village, it's called Jordan Village. It's a colonial village that predates, Canada as a country. It was settled by colonials as like a colonial town that had blacksmiths and all the stuff that came with the colonial town. They're just close to the village was a waterfall that had a textile plant and limestone harvesting for brick and mortar. So the village is an offshoot of that industry. And so the building that we make wine is over 100 years old. And we make wine in this old building that has been used for fruit production for its life. We've been here for 30 years. So the village itself is a quaint little village with a couple of restaurants and the winery. It's nice to visit for sure, art galleries. But then when you get to the vineyard, it's like we're situated, it's very rare. So the escarpment lines the back of the peninsula, which makes this thing viable. But it's rare to have, there's really only 4 off the top of my head. Someone's going to call me later and be like, there's 5 wineries, but there's really only 4 wineries that situated at the physical base of the escarpment. So we're in the Beamsville Bench, we're at the base of the escarpment where it's at its highest at that point. And that is 50 meters. So what is that? Or 30 meters, like 80 feet, 100 feet of just limestone wall with a cap of dolostone rock and lined with trees, all protected. You can go, there's a trail that runs up the escarpment too. You can hike up the escarpment and look down over the vineyards to see the lake. It's quite beautiful. And then there's a tasting room in the middle of the vineyard. So there's lots of stuff to do. There's the vineyards, the wines, the hiking, the art galleries. It's just a great little place to visit. And of course, if you're coming to Niagara, there's not only, we're on the west side of the peninsula, and there's also the east side of the peninsula, which is where you would get Niagara on the lake, which is an amazing little town.
So we don't want to keep you for too long, but is there anything else that you would like everyone to know? We'd also love to know where they can purchase your wines, how they can get Cave Spring at home. So if you want to give us just a little bit of info on that, and also just anything else you'd like to close out with.
I'll start. So we are distributed in the States for sure. We're distributed through HB Wine Merchants. So HB as in H as in house, B as in Bob, HB Wine Merchants. You can find that information out on our website at cavespring.ca, and singular, not springs, cavespring singular.ca. And we're in 11 or 12 states, and we had a kind of a really, we were planning to obviously come into your state and then also continue to expand. Then COVID happened, of course, which has been tough for everybody, right? It's still ongoing, obviously. So yeah, that would be the best place to go for the wines. And in the American market, we have the wines that we have for you to taste there. So we have we have our kind of our off-dry offering, which is our off-dry in the peninsula, which is like the generalized appellation system. And then we have our Riesling Estate, which is Beamsville Bench. And then we have our Riesling CSV, which stands for Cave Spring Vineyard. It's kind of our highest end Riesling. That is Beamsville Bench. And then we have our Pinot Noir and our Cab Franc. So those are the wines that kind of we distribute into the American market, and those can be purchased through HB. I guess one thing I'd like to, I'm not defensive about it, but I'm just passionate, it's like, it's because we're this little, a little country that has that's predominantly very cold growing seasons and things like this, to state just how special the peninsula is. It's to be able to do peaches, plums, nectarines, cherries, wine grapes in this protected zone is very unique, and definitely worth it if you're looking for a place to come once the quarters open. It's definitely worth easily a weekend. You were 100 kilometers from Toronto, or 150 miles, sorry. So very close to Toronto, and the cities come around. it's just it's a really special place, and Cave Spring is a special winery within that place. The owners, as legitimate as it comes in terms of their origins and how they run the company. I'm lucky and fortunate to be part of it, and yeah, we just I think we make pretty serious wines, and we've had some great acknowledgments in the States, actually, in the Wine Enthusiast, Spectator have given us some, and Wine and Spirits magazine have given us some great accolades in the last couple of years, like top 100 wineries. We got nominated for top 5 New World wineries in the world just last year, or 16. So we got some great acknowledgments, and so yeah, this little bit of cultural zone, I guess it's north of the border and also west of the border if you're in New York State, New York. Yeah, it's a little zone that's just a little special place, that's definitely worth exploring. If you ever get your hands on some Ontario wine, it's worth trying.
That's awesome. And we had a lot of fun talking to you today. We definitely learned a lot. Now we're looking forward to trying these wines and talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it, and all the best in all these crazy times.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be sure to follow us on social at Uncorked Corner and on the blog at uncorkedcorner.com for a taste of more food and beverage content.
And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe, rate, and review on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Thanks for listening.